The Czechoslovak new wave of cinema was a fascination filled with fearless directors, a fruitful sense of humor, and radical ways of thinking. This important movement broke through the nationalized film industry shaped by the communist government. With the early 60s came the de-Stalinization and the erasing of restrictions on filmmaking. Instead of furthering the promotion of communist ideology, Czech filmmakers dared to be innovative and controversial. These films mostly consisted of satires of the Communist Party and Czech society. They deal with themes of destruction, feminism, sexuality, and radical resistance. However, what makes these films stand out amongst others that deal with these same themes is the movement's use of the avant-garde. Strange but symbolic images, the use of the non-professional actors, dreamlike realities are just some examples of the surrealist elements used during the Czech New Wave. I want to explore these social issues and the stylized choices used in the surrealist films through Daisies in 1966, directed by and Valerie and Her Week of Wonders 1970, directed by And more importantly, I want to propose the question: can political criticism of Czech society and themes of feminism shine through the stylistic absurdity in the Czech New Wave? As a sophisticated, aesthetically challenging farce, Daisies does what any good farce should do. The film directs the audience's attention away from a more meaningful experience by distorting characters' mannerisms and completely departing from reality. These avant-garde techniques add a layer of absurdity and allow the audience to dwell in a hidden world of harsh truths. This off-putting nature of the doll-like performances, collage editing, and surrealist imagery is able to highlight the indecencies in our own world. The film centers around the protagonists, Marie and Marie, who are trying to figure the world out. They discover that their world is spoiled, and they become committed to spoiling themselves.
Proč nám aspoň nezačal nadávat? On nás snad ani nepolitoval.
Through ripping off older men, feasting in lavish meals, and indulging in all sorts of mischief, the girls are quite successful in doing the opposite of what they are taught. The performances done by the two girls play into the stereotypical portrait of women. They speak in high-pitched voices and act with childlike mannerisms. Although they insult the men around them, the men don't seem to notice. This is because it is expected of them by the men in their lives. Although the Maries stereotypically dance in the field and they put on heavy makeup, they also degrade others and rob people. Doesn't quite make sense, but that's because it's supposed to highlight the madness the patriarchy of tradition confines women to. Not only are the performances unconventional, but so is the editing and the montaging of the film. Throughout, there is little plot or structure. Scenes chaotically switch between black and white, color, and tinted footage. This kind of editing shows the depth the Maries carry, and how they don't fall into the trap of the patriarchal society. During one scene, the girls play a game with scissors. They become mad and snip at each other, eventually chopping one another. The scissors slowly become the editors of the collages, burst into the narrative. The cuts are erratic and wild. Suddenly, the picture has disappeared into snips and fuzzy images. And then the girls are back to being themselves, giggling down a hallway. Then there's a switch from the girls' apartment where they discuss death, burn into the back of an overlay to this sense of innocence. Lastly, the film is filled with surrealist imagery. I want to point out the symbolism of the apples, this forbidden fruit. The apples, whether being eaten or hanging on a tree, are always mentioned as being bad. With a little bit of history, we should know that Czechoslovakia was experiencing a food shortage, and the images of the girls stuffing their faces is almost like a slap in the face to the government as the girls are led by their hunger. So much so that the final scene is the girls sneaking into a feast, shoving their faces and dancing on the spoiled food. The imagery I want to point out is the juxtaposition of this to the last shot of the film. An image of war. These girls laugh, sticking their heels into the food being juxtaposed to bombs going off. These girls unladylike and improper. Surreal images that don't quite make sense being next to each other help paint the picture of what is really happening in our society.
Orlíku. Orlíku.
On the verge of womanhood, Valerie, a young girl, finds herself in the fantasy land of a non-linear fairy tale. This enticing oddity tries to tackle the themes of puberty and the horrors of girlhood through the lens of a nightmare, with dreamlike cinematography, a shifting score, and once again, surrealist imagery. The film opens with Valerie swimming in water. Within the composition, the audience can see her hair down and flowers surrounding her open arms. This imagery provokes the theme of innocence before womanhood. The camera then lingers on Valerie as she skips down a path. There are daisies at her feet, yet mysterious drops of blood slowly fall onto the daisies. She gasps, rushing inside, and the next day she tells her grandmother that she is no longer a girl. The flowers in the water with a fluid camera and bright pale colors juxtaposed with the dark, static shot of the daisy dripping blood. It's an indication that a change is coming on the road to womanhood. And while on this road to womanhood, we find that women are stereotyped and expected to be ladylike. While in Daisies, the two Maries fall into destruction and create their own chaos, the world around Valerie, rather than herself, begins to deteriorate once she begins her cycle. Valerie's friend gets married off to a much older man, and in the shots of her prior to the wedding, she holds a solemn expression as she wears white, surrounded by dark figures behind her. There are plenty of cuts to spilled wine amongst her bouquet of flowers, another symbolic reference to womanhood. The scene where she gets married, there is a quick shot of her pressed up against the wall with her spread, a reference to Jesus on the cross. Then, the camera is positioned as if it is looking through a curtain. Dark figures come and bite at her neck as she resists kissing her new husband. After being bitten, it is then cut to a close-up of her having a changed mind, and the figures preying on her youth. This cut to the camera almost spying on the newlyweds at the end of the bed as she suddenly seems to enjoy this new life. It is revealed that Valerie had been watching them the whole time, and she is clearly uncomfortable. She is seen running away through a field, running away from a situation she knows will eventually catch up to her. These two scenes juxtapose next to each other to create a sense of uncertainty. Valerie is running, yet she trips, and then she runs into the fog. She's running into a fate that will be hers. This dazzling imagery is paired with a dreamy but shifting score. I want to briefly touch upon the ending, as the score shifts heavily from the beginning to the end. The film starts out with a music box sound and a haunting choir of hymns. It's an uneasy start that heavily leans into a child's lens on the world. The surrealism of the images, such as a vampire priest hovering over a puzzled Valerie mixed with a wistful score of music box ticks, create an atmosphere on how children view reality. But why does this matter? Do people still care about the Czech New Wave today? Well, the answer is sort of. I had a hard time researching directors that were personally influenced by the movement, so I took some liberties and explored how the Czech New Wave had influenced movies as a whole. These satires were willing to explore sexual themes and cast non-professional actors and use documentary techniques to present fictional stories. Now, I question if Daisies and Valerie's Week of Wonders could do all this while critiquing society and showcasing themes such as feminism and deconstruction, so I will also question these contemporary films. Gummo, 1997, directed by Harmony Korine, follows two teenagers killing time in a small town that never recovered from a tornado. The film explores themes usually taboo, such as poverty, drug abuse, prostitution, and violence. Shot as a documentary, many of the characters' actions are based on real events, and many of the scenes use non-actors improvising. A lot like Daisies, critics view the film as not being fully fleshed out, having too many themes, and virtually no plot. Others think it's brilliant, unsettling, and a critique at life in a stylized perspective. Labyrinth, 1986, directed by Jim Henson, follows a 16-year-old as she solves a labyrinth to find her baby brother when her wish for him to be taken away is granted by the Goblin King. A lushly designed musical fantasy, loosely inspired by Alice in Wonderland and pleasantly dark, Labyrinth at its core is about youth, stuck between childhood and womanhood. And similarly to Valerie's Week of Wonders, these themes are explored through dreamlike cinematography and a shifting score. Its critique on life, declaring that nothing is fair, especially to a young girl shifting through her way to adulthood. The overarching themes of feminism and criticism of the Czech society, along with the government and religion, does not become outshined by the uncertainty of surrealism and the wonders of the avant-garde. Instead, it is the perfect visual expression of what it means to be a woman growing up in a male-dominated society, and what it means to live in a place that wants to be in control. This disruption of reality doesn't blind the viewer from the underlying truths, but instead pushes it further. This can be done through a change of music, dysfunctional collage editing, dreamlike cinematography, and of course surrealist imagery. All these stylistic elements combine to show that what we deem to be reality might not always appear to be what it seems like on the surface.